Without further ado, hold my beer, ransomware operators and the race to the bottom.
We good? Okay. Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming to our presentation, Hold My Beer, Ransomware Operators, and the Race to the Bottom. We're just going to give you like a sneak peek at what Dan and I see every day working on the threat intel team at Kroll. So as an introduction, my name is Laurie Iacono. I'm a Senior Vice President with Kroll Cyber Risk. I manage the day-to-day of our threat intelligence team. I was formerly a program manager at the National Cyber Forensics Training Alliance, and I also teach cybercrime at a couple of the local universities, including University of Pittsburgh and Robert Morris University, which is where I met my co-speaker Dan. I'll let him introduce himself.
Oh, hello, I'm Dan Cox. I've been with Kroll for about a year and a half now. I started off cybersecurity at Robert Morris. I went through their master's in cyber intel and investigations, and that's how I met Laurie, and then ended up working at Kroll, and now I do a bunch of ransomware stuff, dark web research, really just anything that comes through. We kind of do a mix of everything. So yeah, lots of OSINT research and lots of ransomware research.
So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to cover kind of like we are here, like kind of the current state of ransomware as we're seeing it, working in an incident response practice. We're going to talk a little bit about how we got here, so some factors that we think kind of led us to this current state. And then we're going to talk a lot about what we're learning along the way, specifically what we're learning from some of the threat actor shaming sites, which Dan has done a lot of work kind of drilling into the analysis of those. So talking about we are here, you can see this navy line on this slide here. This basically represents the distribution of threat incident types that we're seeing in our incident response practice. That navy line is representing ransomware, and you can see that that is far and above the other lines on the chart. That's because except for Q1, when we had Microsoft Exchange proxy logon, ransomware is by far the most frequent threat incident type that we see in our ransomware cases, or in our incident response cases. And it's actually been like that since August 2019, so it's been holding steady for about 2 years. Prior to that time, we would see a lot more like email compromise, a lot more unauthorized access cases, but starting in August 2019, we started to see a big rise in the frequency of ransomware, and that has pretty much held steady since then, like I said, except for the little skewing the results with Microsoft Exchange earlier this year. The next thing that we've been seeing a lot of in our practice is the use of these, what they call double extortion tactics. So the ransomware groups, they're not just encrypting networks, but before they encrypt the network, they're going in, they're exfiltrating data, and then the extortion component at the end, first of all, they're extorting, pay us for the decryptor, but they're also saying pay us or we're going to post that stolen data on one of our actor-controlled leak sites, basically. And these actor-controlled sites, these are basically like the ransomware gangs will put up their own kind of branded site where they're posting the victim data. We are seeing in the ransomware cases we see at Kroll, about 86% of them right now are associated with this double extortion tactic. We did a similar analysis of this about a year ago, and we were at about 40%. So the use of this tactic has about more than doubled in a year's time. And you can also see here the growth of these sites in 2021. The bars here represent like unique new sites that we observed during the year. So there was a big spike from Q2 to Q3 of different groups adopting this tactic. So I want to go into a little bit of flashback here, kind of talk about the ransomware-as-a-service model. And one of the groups that really popularized this model was GandCrab ransomware. Here you can see their landing page. They were very active from about January 2018 to May 2019. And this group, they I don't know that they were the first to use the service, but they definitely really popularized it and kind of brought it to the mainstream. A ransomware as a service is is essentially a model where the ransomware operators kind of like outsource the distribution of their ransomware to affiliates. Then those affiliates get a cut of the ransom proceeds. So this helps those ransomware games kind of force multiply how many targets they're able to go after, because they're using this huge network of affiliates to actually distribute it. When GandCrab retired in May 2019, they made a pretty big post. They like a retirement little letter on one of the dark web forums, and they claimed that they had made $2 billion US in that 18 months. Now this is a threat actor. This is what a threat actor is claiming, so we don't know how accurate that $2 billion is, but we know that it's fair to say that they made quite a bit of money in that time. So if you remember that 2 slides ago, I mentioned that it was August 2019 that Kroll started to see so many ransomware cases in our caseload. So it's very likely that a lot of other groups at that time, a lot of other cyber criminals, saw how profitable this was and started getting into the ransomware game. The next kind of flashback here, this is the Maze news site. This site was one of the first of the actor-controlled sites. So Maze Crew was really the first ransomware group to threaten this kind of data publication and then actually carry it out and post data. This site went up in May 2019. It was eventually, they eventually retired in November of last year. But this site was up for quite some time, hundreds of victims. You know, they would definitely post after an attack. If people paid the ransom, they would take the data down. Actually, they would remove it from their site. We had, unfortunately, some clients that happened to, and we would see proof that they did at least delete it from their site. Another one of the groups that quickly adopted this double extortion method and set up an actor-controlled site was the Revil gang. They set up, their site is called Happy Blog. So they were the second ones to kind of get into this method, and they kind of like gave it a lot of personal flavor, I guess I would say. So they would kind of like write these letters about their victims, kind of trolling their victims essentially. So we've seen, they've went after a lot of law firms that had high profile clients. So they've trolled everyone pretty much from like Lady Gaga to Donald Trump on their site. This summer, they were also the first of at least what we've observed of the ransomware groups using what we would call sextortion tactics. They were threatening this one CEO that if they didn't pay, they were going to basically post a dick pic. They did not pay, and they actually posted the dick pic. I think my question as a cybersecurity professional is why the CEO of a significant company would have a dick pic on his work computer, but he did, and they found it. So that's the kind of things that these gangs are going after. So obviously, most people in this room are surely familiar with the Kaseya supply chain attack that happened in July. Revil went on hiatus after that. They came up for a few weeks, the end of September, but now they are down officially as of Monday, and yesterday there was an article released that it looks like that was international law enforcement cooperation to actually bring that site down. So hopefully they've been disrupted. I want to talk a little bit more. I know I've been talking about the exfiltration and the actor-controlled sites. There are other tactics that we've definitely seen them using during the negotiation period. One of those tactics is DDoS. And I will say we've seen the threat of DDoS be used. So Avidon here on the screen, Avidon and Suncrypt, both of those variants threaten to basically DDoS victims during the negotiation periods. We haven't observed in our caseload that anyone's actually like had a successful DDoS attack as during the negotiations, but it's one of those other things that they're threatening them. One thing that we have observed quite frequently, unfortunately for our clients, is this tactic of cold calling the victims. The DarkSide ransomware gang, they were marketing this on the dark web earlier this year, kind of how we have this call center that we're using, and if you're an affiliate of ours, we'll basically, have this call center. We'll be calling the contacts of the company to try to get them to pay the ransom. And we saw a lot of that happen to a lot of our clients, almost like within days of that post going up on the dark web. Another tactic that we've seen them use is emailing victim clients, or basically like the clients or customers of the victim organization. So you see here this email from the CLOP ransomware group saying your personal data has been stolen and will be published. We've seen them do this. So I know the Maze team, at one point they were going after patients at a plastic surgery center saying, we'll share your before pictures. We saw them go after patients for a rehab clinic. We'll share pictures that are related to your drug use if your clinic doesn't pay the ransom. And we've also seen another group actually go after victims of I wouldn't say victims, it was patients at a celebrity hair club for men. So they were kind of telling them we're going to show the world that you guys actually have hair transplants. So it just kind of shows, how low some of these groups will go in trying to get their ransom payment. So we can't talk about ransomware in 2021 without mentioning the Colonial Pipeline attack, and that was which DarkSide was responsible for. In the wake of that, obviously everyone in this room knows, how devastating ransomware can be, but this kind of brought it into the mainstream. All of a sudden, the media was engaged, and obviously there was a lot of law enforcement scrutiny on some of these forums that had heretofore been kind of harboring some of this activity when it comes to the ransomware-as-a-service ecosphere. So they quickly kind of banned some of this activity on their forums. Now, since that, we've seen, obviously it's a ban on a cyber criminal forum, so, we'll use that term lightly, but they definitely shy away from using the word ransomware because they know how much attention it attracts. So we definitely see them using kind of code words, trying to still accomplish the same thing. And we've also seen a lot of the ransomware activity actually transfer over to a new forum that came up, I think in like July, RAMP forum, and that one has a little higher bar to entry, probably because they want to avoid some of the looky-loos that were coming into the forums in the wake of Colonial Pipeline. So some of the other things that we've seen on the shaming sites since that time, first of all, is that we saw that rise from Q2 to Q3 and more actors putting up these actor-controlled sites where they were dumping data. We've seen a lot of actors pivot to just exfiltration, so they're not even using a ransomware to encrypt. They're just going into the system, they're stealing the data, and then they're extorting it to try to, prevent some kind of data publication. We've also seen a lot of doxing on the site since then. Sometimes people get immune sometimes to like, okay, well, so what? My data's dumped. So the threat actors constantly have to keep ratcheting it up. So we've seen a lot of our clients, like sensitive data, like plain text passwords has been dumped on some of these sites. In the past couple of weeks, we've also seen, let me see. We've also seen some rhetoric from some of these groups coming out against recovery companies. So recovery companies are basically third parties that some of the victims will use to kind of help them negotiate with that threat actor to try to lower the ransom demands. And a lot of times that is successful and they are able to get a significant reduction in that ransom. So some of the groups, Ragnar Locker and Grief, this is just an example of them coming out earlier I think it was a couple months ago, they basically come out and said, if you work with a recovery company or we think you're working with a recovery company, we will just delete all your data, showing that they were kind of trying to play hardball with these groups. We haven't actually seen them do that, but it's just another threat that they have made. Another thing that we have seen, as you can tell, this is why we called it Hold My Beer, because every day when we think that the ransomware groups can't top themselves, Dan and I are messaging each other the next day that we can't believe what they did. So this was one where Lockbit ransomware, they've been especially active after the DarkSide shutdown. They started soliciting actually for insiders to help them launch malware. So this image here, This actually shows up after a victim has been encrypted. The wallpaper will say all your files are encrypted, and it will also put up a little advertisement saying that if you want to make millions of dollars, you can work with us, giving us passwords to VPN or RDP to help us get into networks. So, we're talking about insiders, and they're going after insiders in our, industry, in the cybersecurity industry, probably with that posting. But now that this ransomware landscape is kind of spread out, we've got all these affiliates, we've got all these different kind of pieces of the pie that are feeding into a ransomware as a service operation. That means that there's more likely to be individuals within that ransomware supply chain that may be disgruntled and end up sharing information. So this happened in August. This was a disgruntled affiliate that was associated with Conti ransomware. He actually dumped basically a training manual. That's what they give their new affiliates to help them launch ransomware. And in that training manual, there was a lot of technical details about the tooling that they use, about how they move through networks that we were able to share with our detection and monitoring teams, as well as our forensic examiners for threat hunting. But for the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to focus in on what we learned when it comes to exfiltration. One of the things they were told basically is that's one of the first things they should do when they're in the network is start that exfiltration. So it kind of highlights how important that is to them as a part of these attacks. And some of the things that they were told to look for are items related to finance, accounting, clients. So as we said before, they tend to go after clients and customers. They're also told that what's especially important for them to go after are documentation related to cyber insurance policies. So it's likely that they're trying to look at a cyber insurance policy, see what they may be insured for, and use that as some kind of leverage when they go into the negotiations. So I have talked a lot about that exfiltration piece, and then Dan's going to talk a little bit more about those sites and what actually happens with the data.
Okay, there we go. So looking at the different actor-controlled shaming sites, I believe last night the most updated count that we had was 34. Ooh. Yeah. There we go. I just won't touch this. Okay. Oh, was that better? Okay. Yeah, so last night we had counted that there were 34 active actor-controlled sites where they're leaking victim data and threatening to post different attacks onto their websites. So there's, on the sites, there's always the large claims of, oh, we hacked X company, and we stole 2 terabytes of data. If they don't pay us in a week, we're going to post that data onto our site. And when you actually look at the sites every day and break them down, you can see that that's not usually the case with the sites. There is data posted to most of them, and yes, it is normally a large amount of data, but it really depends on the group if they're going to post that data, when they will post that data, how much data. And then actually, whenever you get into trying to retrieve the data, there's a lot of troubles that you run into with that. So for these different cases, what we typically see is the post will go up about 2 to 3 weeks after the initial attack. And then with that, you'll have a countdown timer that'll start anywhere from 4 days to 2 weeks to a month, that it gives the victim time to negotiate and decide if they're going to pay the ransom or not. If they do not pay, they'll move on to leaking screenshots, where, like you saw with Laurie, sometimes they contain plain text passwords. They might be personal information documents, whether that be passports, driver's license of employees, student records if it was a school, different things like that. And that's all in a push to actually get the victim to pay the ransom to remove the data from their site. Whenever you go through most of the different negotiating companies, one thing that you'll see very common is that they get the negotiation extended. And usually that just drags it on long enough so that they can keep working down the threat actor's price. And then after so long, though, whenever the countdown does finally expire, they'll release the data either all at once in one bulk download, or it'll come out in different parts. And we've seen the parts leak anywhere from over a few days to over a few months that data will slowly trickle out. And then eventually that data will get published onto their site. So for most of our different clients, if data does appear on the sites, we do go out and retrieve that data. And just a few different things that we've noticed with that is over Tor, the connection is always very slow and it's very spotty. So say a group does actually go out and post a terabyte onto one of their Tor sites. It's very hard to actually retrieve that data set and then work with it. You might be looking at a download that takes up to 2 weeks. And your normal just person visiting these sites probably doesn't have the infrastructure set up and prepared to download any random victim's data that they see fit. That would take up to 2 weeks. So then the data might not actually get published. They might get to the screenshots phase and dumping the proof, and then not actually move forwards with anything. The different things, some of the groups will post to different third-party sites like Mega, there's SendSpace, OneDrive that they'll put the data onto. And with that, that actually opens the door to where we can contact that provider and then have the data removed from the site. And then with the groups deleting data, occasionally like we just saw with Revel, where their site was taken down, that takes all the data links off with it. And then, so with that, yes, your data may have been posted to the site, but looking at it, how long the data will actually stay live and how long it's actually maintainable is a very large statistics that we'll look into to try and help out some of our different clients. All right, this thing is, let's try this way.
I didn't touch the thing.
Yeah. Nope. Okay. So yeah, looking across the different sites, there's a bunch of different statistics that you can pull to actually analyze the group. And this is slightly different than looking at their actual attacks, whether that be their IOCs or TTPs that they're using on their attacks. This is slightly different of their TTPs into just their shaming sites and how that victim data kind of gets performed and may appear onto the dark web if they don't pay this ransom. So some of the different things that you can look at, is the actual victims that make it to the site versus the number of victims that actually have data published with that listing. There is the claim data that the threat actors claim to have exfilled from their network. And then it's typically much less that they actually will post to the site. So we get to kind of see both sides of that. We'll be looking through the network traffic to look at exfiltration. Most of the time, what the actors claim, instantly you can roll out that it's a lot higher than what we saw. But occasionally there will be where you'll see them exfil maybe 1.5 terabytes, and that 1.5 terabytes does appear onto the site. Like I mentioned with using the third-party providers to host this data, there's different statistics that you can pull with looking at how long do those links stay online before the third-party provider would remove those. And then what we've also seen is actors upload to sites like Anon files, where the link will actually expire after a set period of time. So yes, your data may appear onto the site, but will it still be there in a week, in 2 weeks, once this becomes public knowledge and actually out there? So with those different statistics, we've kind of can provide those to our clients just to give them an idea of here's the different timeline that we expect to see with this group. Here's what we expect to see with the data that does get posted, and here's how long that data is expected to stay online if it does appear. Okay, there we go. Oh, maybe not. Okay. So different groups that we looked at just for this analysis was Black Matter, which is the alleged DarkSide from the Colonial Pipeline hack. We have Defray777, who's going by RansomEXX now. They've been around for a few years now, but more within the past year, they've moved to the shaming site model. Hive is a newer variant that we saw at the beginning of the year. They're pretty nasty. They tend to, whenever they get into a network, they'll generate their own encryption keys. And sometimes we'll notice that the encryption keys will get put into memory. So that way, then if the victim restarts the computer at all, those keys are lost and decryption would just not be possible even if they did pay the ransom. We have Revil/Sedino Kibi. This is with the Kasei attack, and like Laurie mentioned, they're actually seized right now and looking for different models to move. In that group, actually, last week they were posting about that they believe their servers were compromised, and then yesterday we found out that the servers actually were compromised by law enforcement. And then we looked at Vice Society, which is suspected to be a Hello Kitty spinoff. And Hello Kitty has been around for at least 2 years now. They have many different spinoff variants, and each of their sites, or each of their variants, will get their own shaming site. But typically, what we see with those is they're only online for about a month or two, and then they'll pivot to using a different name. But Vice Society with them has been active for about 8 to 10 months now. And then we have ZingLocker, which is a suspected variant of MountLocker. ZingLocker has gone down right now, and believed to be a new group called Quantum Locker. They've kind of shifted their tactics over the different courses of their variants, but through each variant, like we saw with MountLocker, they would post a victim, and then 2 or 3 days later, the victim would appear on the next site, which would have been AstraLocker. So the same exact victim, same exact data is posted. And then we saw them do the same thing with Astra to ZingLocker, and then now ZingLocker to Quantum Locker. And then on the right there, we just have a total victim count of what we scraped. This was from, I believe, about 2 weeks ago for the active victims on each of the sites. Ooh, could you grab me my water, please? Oh. The PowerPoint is on another level. Yeah, I know. What is it pressing? I have no idea. Is it the clicker? Okay. Oh, no, it's not that clicker. Is it this clicker?
Yeah, if you put it on that mode.
Okay. If we can get this, stay on one slide. There we go. So whenever we went to go pull the statistics from different shaming sites, we actually still had the Revil site was still online. This was only a few days before their operator stated that their servers were compromised and shut down their operations. And as you saw on this last slide, they had about 250 victims listed to their site. But then whenever we moved to... Okay, there we go. So you saw that they had about 250 victims posted, which was far more than the second. But whenever we look at the actual total data that was live on their site, there was only around 40 gigs, which then compared to like ZingLocker with 1.3 terabytes, where they only had about 20 victims. So you can just see instantly the giant kind of variances between the groups on how much data they would put up per listing and how many listings would actually stay active. And so then whenever we broke that down for average per victim, you can see with Hive, where they had, please stay, there we go. They had 25 victims listed onto their site, but only 0.07 gigs of data actually ever was posted to the site. And so then if we look at the sites like Black Matter and ZingLocker, who are posting large zip files of several hundred gigs, down to Hive, which might post a kilobyte, a few megabytes. There's just a large variance there. And so then knowing that coming into the actual investigation, where from day one you can say, this is what we expect from this group. If, say it's ZingLocker, we're expecting a lot of data exfiltration, whereas Hive, we can tell the incident response team that there may not be as much exfiltration, and they still look around, but we're not looking at too much of a risk to get onto the site. Let me try clicking. Is that the next one? Oh yeah. So this is looking at the actual victims that are posted to the site versus the victims with actual data onto their posting. So we have ZingLocker, Vice Society, and Defray. If you made it onto their site, your data was going to appear onto the site. Compared to variants like Revil, where you only have about a 25% chance, if you get posted to this site, is data actually going to leak? And then moving over to the right side here, the trend that we can see with the different groups is how long that data would actually stay live. So Revil had about 250 victims, but only 10% of their download links had stayed online. And this goes back to victims ranging back to about early to mid 2020 was the earliest one on there. Up to several days ago, before they were shut down, they were still adding new victims. Okay. And then, so whenever we shift to looking at how much data that they claim that they will be posting to their site from the claimed exfiltration to how much data actually appears on the site, you can see on the graph on the left there just how large that shift is. Where groups like Black Matter are claiming that they have 7 terabytes of information posted to their site, but whenever you actually go through the information, there's only about 760 gigabytes on there. This does get to show with Defray over on the left. What they claim is what they've actually exfilled. So that is a great tool for our incident response team. Once the initial post comes up and they claim that they have 400 gigs of data, we can tell the IR team you're looking for 400 gigs of exfiltration somewhere on this network. Then if you actually see with the Hive one too, they have very large claims on their website, where some of the groups they were claiming that they had about 300 to 500 gigs posted onto the site. But whenever we looked at the actual data available, it was only about 0.5% of their claims. So there's very little data available on the site versus what they claim to have exfilled. Oh, it's just the forward button. Back one works fine. So breaking down where the groups are hosting these sites, you can see on the left with the asterisks, those are the actual third-party providers I had mentioned that will cooperate and may actually remove that data from their site once they notice that it is live. And then if with the different groups, you'll see them have different file servers. So whether that be it's a section of their website that is actually hosting the downloads or a separate Tor Apache server. What we noticed with the Tor hosted, whether it be the Apache or on their actual site, was those were the groups that had the 100% uptime and very large amounts of data. Compared to your groups like Hive, we use sites like Mega and the Private Lab and only post maybe a handful of the data that they claimed, and then compared to the actual other groups where there's several hundred gigs. There we go. Okay, so this is kind of a breakdown of just all those statistics kind of rolled into one. Oh, can I take that off? The turnaround. There we go. So yeah, whenever we look at the different groups, like you can see with Defray, Vice Society, and ZingLocker, if you made it onto their site, you have a 100% chance of that data actually appearing, compared to looking at like someone like Black Matter, you only have about a 50% chance of that data appearing. Then one of the things that we really noticed with Hive was that out of their 25 victims, roughly 70% had data posted, but the total data that was actually posted on the site was only 2 gigs. So out of the around 20 victims that had data posted, that only amounted to 2 gigabytes of data, which is very, very little for the around 20 victims. Compared to with Black Matter, with 26 victims, we saw about 760. Let's see. Yeah, so just kind of overview of the different stats. Black Matter, roughly 10% of their claimed data that was exfilled actually gets posted. And that did line up with what we saw with different Black Matter cases as far as their exfil goes. And then looking to the previous DarkSide cases we had before their shutdown. One of the just really cool kind of stats we saw with that was the victims with data posted for Black Matter was rated around 50%. That was exactly the same for DarkSide. So just kind of just an odd TTP. Doesn't necessarily mean the groups are related, but just goes on to pile on with the rest of the information on the groups. And then, like I said, with Defray, Vice Society, and ZingLocker, who use the Tor-hosted sites. If that data does appear on the site, it's going to stay on the site, compared to with Revolt using the third-party sites, where most of the time they're getting taken offline or the links are actually expiring before the data is even up for too long. Well, then, just like with any threat actors that we deal with, oh, I thought it was going to stay. Like with any of the threat actors we deal with, even if you do pay this ransom or your data does not appear onto the sites, there's no really telling where that data is, who has access, where it has been published online. So this was from one of the chats that we had with one of the threat actors after they had given us data that a victim had paid for to have unlocked. So of course, we could easily have backups, but we assure you we do not now. They've kind of been in a joking manner. Whenever we showed the client these logs, they were not too happy about that, with the actor kind of making a joke that they still had their data backed up. And the lawyers were kind of iffy about that going forwards. But as far as the larger groups go, don't want to say that they're trustworthy, but they do kind of like to keep their reputation in line. So say a large group like Black Matter, a victim pays to have their data removed, and that data is sprayed across the entire internet. The next victim that comes along with Black Matter is likely not to pay, because even if they do pay, their data still may get posted somewhere online. Oh, I worked for the last one. Guess you want to guess this one?
So obviously the best cure for ransomware is prevention, because these actors are obviously very opportunistic. They're taking advantage of everything they can do to get into networks. They're also taking advantage of security vulnerabilities that they observe. So the biggest way to stop a ransomware attack is to prevent it from actually happening. So these are just some controls that we've observed in Kroll, as far as things that people should probably be doing to have increased cyber resiliency, I guess they would say. Multi-factor authentication. The majority, unfortunately, of the ransomware cases that we see, the majority of those people do not have multi-factor authentication across the board. Maybe they have it at like a part of their organization, but that seems to be a huge factor for these groups. Obviously, they go after VPN, so vulnerable VPNs. If there is a patch to a VPN appliance that you're using, you should definitely be updating that, because we do see those actors, trying to exploit those. Open RDP, that is another one that they will try to exploit. We recommend everyone have some kind of endpoint detection monitoring to catch some of this precursor malware before it actually goes to a full ransomware attack. And then we also suggest that everyone, have some kind of a plan in the event that this does happen. Do you want to talk about the other ones?
Oh, yeah, I can go through some of them. Well, just a few different things to go along with those. In case of an attack does happen, you need to go through your different backups, kind of have plans, have different training into restoring from the backups. So whenever these ransomware groups come in, they may get into your network, encrypt your backups, delete the backups, or just kind of lock you out from those. So it's just me whenever I stand up here. So having just the different kind of awareness and ability to go through that can definitely save you a lot of money and time recovering from those. Or your access controls, constantly reviewing, constantly updating, and managing those, compared to what we'll see in a few different cases where an actor gets onto a network, whether they create an account, escalate privileges onto an account that was already created. Companies not knowing about that actor might be on your network for several months to several years. Then with your email hygiene and security culture, your number one threat is always going to be the end user at their desk. So kind of just constantly promoting with those, letting your different coworkers know what is going on with the landscape, what is popular right now, and then having the actual controls built in to back that up. So whether that be an Outlook with the reporting phishing button, whether that be the tagging all external emails in Outlook, or even just going through and teaching your employees, here's what not to do if you believe that you received a phishing email. And then I did just want to touch on, like Laurie said, with the multi-factor and VPNs. So even if you have those implemented, we have seen many cases where those are bypassed just due to them either being implemented poorly or improperly or not patched. One of the largest ones that we see was a 2018 VPN vulnerability where actors have gone out and scraped these credentials and posted them all online. And this has been out for 3 years, and we're still seeing companies come in that are still vulnerable to this and still have the exact plain text creds that were leaked for their VPNs. And then infrastructure and segmentation, kind of limiting just how the threat actors can jump around your network and separating those, whether this be they get into a marketing computer versus one of your salespeople's computers, and then getting into being able to spread across the entire network. So having the different monitoring across the endpoints and then being able to actually identify and stop those kind of attacks are critical to just not having your company be shut down for, whether it be 2 weeks to 4 weeks during the entire attack. Anything else kind of go with that? Does anybody have any questions for us? Yeah, is everybody ready to go for lunch? We can see the boxes back there all stacked up. Awesome. Yeah, thank you, everybody.